This is the first video to go along with the blended classroom to help you with instruction before going into different modules. Remember, this is not to replace any of the readings. This is just a supplement if you need a little bit more information to help you complete the assignments. So as we look at the U.S. Constitution, and as we look at the government that's created starting at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, we can see that there is a variety of different themes that emerge that don't necessarily have a specific spot in the Constitution where they're all referenced. You can kind of see shades of it throughout the document. One of the things that we do know about the Constitution today, looking back on it, is its flexibility. Some of us call it a living document that are historians. Because of the amendment process and because of its ability to be interpreted by different generations, it has changed to reflect the times, as well as still having these basic principles as elements. So what are these 7 principles of the Constitution? The first principle of the Constitution is popular sovereignty, which is just a fancy way of saying that the people rule. And that is shown best in the preamble or the first paragraph of the Constitution. And it begins with an emphasis on the people with the phrase, "We the people of the United States." What was the purpose of this? Why were the people ruling? Because with the previous government, the Articles of Confederation, they had not done a good job. So if you continue that sentence, it reads, "in order to form a more perfect union." So what is the purpose of our government? Our government is to reflect the will of the people and the desires of the people. We do that by electing representatives to Congress, by electing presidents to the executive branch. The second principle of the Constitution is the idea of limited government, which makes perfect sense if you think about why the Constitution exists. We overthrew a king. We created our own government. The reason we did that is because the king, we felt, was abusing his power. So we tried to limit government with the Articles of Confederation. They took it too far. But those fears that the former colonists still had about a too powerful government still existed. And the limited government is reflected in powers that are denied to the various branches of the government throughout the earlier articles of the Constitution. Limited government also reflects the idea that we believe that no person, including the President of the United States, is above the law. So how do we make sure that the limited powers of government are enforced? They did that by following the idea of separation of powers. Article 1 establishes the legislative branch. Article 2 established the executive branch. And Article 3 identified the need for Congress to eventually establish a judicial branch. Each of them has distinct powers that are separate of each other. And they also have ways that they can further check the powers that each has. And that's our next principle, checks and balances. Congress passes laws. It starts in the House of Representatives. It then goes to the Senate. When both houses of Congress approve, it goes to the president, and it is balanced out that the president has to sign the legislation. So then how does the legislative branch check the president? If the president chooses to veto that legislation, by still getting a majority of votes, or two-thirds majority in Congress, they can override that president's veto. Then what about the judicial branch? Well, if a law, even if it is passed by Congress and signed by the president, is challenged in court, the Supreme Court can rule that law unconstitutional, and they can invalidate that in that. Thereby, each branch is separate from each other and has the responsibility to make sure that the other two branches are not abusing their power. And the rule book that we use to determine whether they're abusing that power is the Constitution. Federalism set aside fears that the states had that the federal government would have too much power. So federalism believed that there are certain things that both the states and the federal government should be allowed to do. And this shared responsibility, or these shared powers of the state and federal government, represent federalism. For example, both the federal government and the state government have the power to levy taxes against the residents of the nation and that state. However, anything that is not specifically given as a power to the federal government, according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, is a power that is reserved to the states. So therefore, since there is nothing in the Constitution about public education, that is a power that resides with the states. However, those state laws about education cannot violate federal laws regarding the Constitution. So therefore, everybody has to cooperate at the state and federal level together to make sure that the laws are being followed. Republicanism is the idea that people will vote and elect representatives. It's a belief of a republic, okay? And a republic is any type of government where an election takes place. Republicanism is best shown through the election of members of the legislative branch. Originally, according to the Constitution, the people only voted for the House of Representatives. And later, the Constitution was amended to increase the voting power of eventually first men and eventually women to elect senators and presidents. And finally, the seventh principle of the Constitution is the idea of individual rights. With the limiting of government power, the idea was that we were limiting it to protect the rights of the people. But it's even more shown at the end of the Constitution in the amendments, and eventually with the adoption of the Bill of Rights, where it specifically outlines the rights of the individual. So these 7 principles are not unique to just the studying of the Constitution. These are ideals that hopefully you can see reflected throughout actions and activities that we'll be looking at throughout the year.